returning to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Reveries of the Solitary Walker. Picking up in the fourth walk. Of the small number of books I still occasionally read, Plutarch is the author who grips and benefits me the most. He was the first I read in my childhood. He will be the last I read in my old age. He is almost the only author I have never read without gaining something. The day before yesterday, I was reading in his moral works the treatise How to Profit from One's Enemies. The same day, while arranging some pamphlets sent to me by their authors, I came across one of the journals of Father Rousseau, on the title page of which he had written these words: Vitam vero impedente Rousseau. Too familiar with the turns of phrase of these gentlemen to be fooled by this one, I understood that by that semblance of politeness he had meant to be cruelly ironic toward me. But based on what? Why this sarcasm? What could I have done to warrant it? To profit from the lessons of the good Plutarch, I resolved to devote the walk of the following day to examining myself on lying, and I came to it quite confirmed in the previously held opinion that the know thyself of the temple of Delphi was not as easy a maxim to follow as I had believed in my confessions. The following day, having set off to carry out this resolution, the first idea which came to me, when I began to collect my thoughts, was that of a dreadful lie I told in my early youth, the memory of which has troubled me all my life, and even comes in my old age to sadden my heart again, already distressed as it is in so many other ways. This lie, in itself a great crime, must have become an even greater one because of its consequences, of which I have always been unaware, but which remorse has made me suppose as cruel as possible. However, considering only how I was disposed when telling it, this lie was simply an effect of mortification, and far from originating from an intention to harm her who was the victim of it, I can swear by heaven that in the very instant this invincible shame tore it from me, I would joyfully have shed all my blood to turn the consequences on myself alone. This is a delirium I can explain only by saying, and this is what I think and feel, that in that instant my timid natural temperament subjugated all the wishes of my heart. The memory of this unfortunate act and the inextinguishable regrets it left me have inspired in me a horror for lying that should have preserved my heart from this vice for the rest of my life. When I adopted my motto, I felt deserving of it, and I did not doubt I was worthy of it when, due to the phrase of Father Rousseau, I began to examine myself more seriously. Then, scrutinizing myself more carefully, I was quite surprised at the number of things of my own invention I recalled having passed off as true, at the same time that, inwardly proud of my love for truth, I was sacrificing my security, my interest, and myself to it, with an impartiality of which I know no other example among human beings. What surprised me the most was that in recalling these fabrications I felt no true repentance for them. I, in whose heart nothing offsets the horror of a falsehood, I, who have braved punishments, if it were necessary to lie to avoid them, by that strange inconsistency did I thus lie with gaiety of heart, unnecessarily, without profit, and by what inconceivable contradiction did I feel not the least regret, I, who for 50 years have not ceased to be afflicted by remorse for a lie. Again, from the top of the paragraph, what surprised me the most was that in recalling these fabrications I felt no true repentance for them. I, in whose heart nothing offsets the horror of a falsehood. I, who would brave punishments, if it were necessary to lie to avoid them. By what strange inconsistency did I thus lie with gaiety of heart, unnecessarily, without profit? And by what inconceivable contradiction did I feel not the least regret? I, who for 50 years have not ceased to be afflicted by remorse for a lie. I have never become inured to my faults. Moral instinct has always guided me well. My conscience has preserved its initial integrity, and even if it had been altered by bending to my interest, how, having preserved all its rectitude on those occasions when a man, forced by his passions, may at least excuse himself for his weakness, does it lose its rectitude only with regard to indifferent matters, for which there is no excuse for vice? I saw that the accuracy of the judgment I had to make about myself on this point depended upon a solution to this problem, and after having thoroughly examined it, this is the manner in which I managed to explain it to myself. I remember having read in a philosophy book that to lie is to conceal a truth we ought to make manifest. From that definition, it indeed follows that to withhold a truth we have no obligation to declare is not to lie. But does he who, content with not telling the truth in such a case, says the opposite lie or not? According to the definition, we could not say that he lies, for if he gives counterfeit money to a man to whom he owes nothing, he undoubtedly deceives this man, but he does not rob him. Two questions arise here for examination, each one very important. The first, when and how we owe the truth to another, since we do not always owe it. The second, whether there are cases in which we may innocently deceive. I am well aware that this second question is entirely settled negatively in books where the most austere morality costs the author nothing, affirmatively in society, where the morality of books is considered idle chatter, impossible to put into practice. So let me leave these mutually contradicting authorities and seek to resolve these questions for myself by my own principles. General and abstract truth is the most precious of all goods. Without it, man is blind. It is the eye of reason. By it man learns to direct himself, to be what he ought to be, to do what he ought to do, to head toward his true end. Particular and individual truth is not always a good. It is sometimes an evil, very often an indifferent thing. The things important for a man to know, and of which he must be aware to achieve happiness, are perhaps not very numerous. But however numerous they are a good which belongs to him, which he has a right to demand wherever he may find it, and which he cannot keep from him without committing the most iniquitous of all robberies, since it is one of those goods common to all, and one whose disclosure does not deprive the person who makes it. As for the truths, which have no usefulness whatever, neither for instruction nor in practice, how could they be a good which is owed, since they are not even a good? And since property is founded only on usefulness, where there is no possible usefulness, there can be no property. We can claim a piece of ground, however barren, because we can at least live on the soil. But whether an idle fact, indifferent in all regards and without consequence for anybody, be true or false, is of no interest to anyone. In the moral order, nothing is useless, any more than in the physical order. Nothing of that which is good for nothing can be owed. For a thing to be owed, it is necessary that it be, or that it may be, useful. Thus the truth owed is that which concerns justice, and this sacred name of truth is debased if applied to vain things, whose existence is indifferent to all and knowledge of which is useless for anything. Truth, stripped of every kind of possible usefulness, cannot therefore be a thing owed, and consequently he who suppresses it or disguises it does not lie at all. But are there any of these truths so perfectly sterile as to be in every way useless for everything? That is another matter to discuss, to which I will come back shortly. As for now, let us go on to the second question. Not to say what is true and to say what is false are two very different things, but the same effect can none the less result from them, for the result is assuredly quite the same every time that this effect is null. Wherever the truth is indifferent, the opposing error is also indifferent, from whence it follows that in such a case he who deceives by saying the opposite of the truth is no more unjust than he who deceives by not declaring it, for with useless truths error is no worse than ignorance. Whether I believe the sand at the bottom of the sea to be white or red matters no more to me than being unaware of what color it is. How could we be unjust when we harm no one, since injustice consists only in the wrong done to someone else? But to settle these questions in this summary manner still does not furnish me any sure, practical rule without many preliminary explanations necessary for applying it accurately in all cases which may present themselves. For if the obligation to tell the truth is founded only on its usefulness, how will I make myself the judge of this usefulness? Very often, what is to one person's advantage is to another person's prejudice. Private interest is almost always opposed to public interest. How should we conduct ourselves in such cases? Must what is useful to an absent person be sacrificed to what is useful to a person to whom we are speaking? Must the truth which profits one person while harming another be kept quiet or uttered? Must we weigh everything we say only on the scale of the public good or only on that of distributive justice? And am I confident of understanding all the relationships of the matter well enough so as to apply the insights I possess only according to rules of equity? Moreover, in examining what we owe others, have I sufficiently examined what we owe ourselves, and what we owe truth for its own sake? If I do no harm to another in deceiving him, does it follow that I do none to myself? And is it sufficient to be never unjust in order to be always innocent? How many embarrassing discussions we could easily extricate ourselves from by saying, "Let us always be truthful, whatever comes of it." Justice itself is in the truth of things. A lie is always iniquity, error is deceit, whenever we set forth that which is not as the rule of what we ought to do or believe. And whatever consequence results from the truth, we are always blameless when we have told it, because we have put nothing of our own in it. But that is to settle the question without answering it. The issue was not to declare whether it would always be good to tell the truth, but whether we were always under an equal obligation to do so. And according to the definition I was examining, supposing that we had no obligation to distinguish the cases in which truth is strictly owed from those in which we can remain quiet about it within injustice, and disguise it without lying. For I found that such cases really existed. The issue, then, is to seek a sure rule for recognizing and accurately determining those cases. But where can this rule and the proof of its infallibility be come by? In all difficult questions of morality like this, I have always found myself better off answering them according to the dictates of my conscience than according to the insights of my reason. Moral instinct has never deceived me. Until now it has remained sufficiently pure in my heart that I can trust it. And if in my conduct it sometimes remains silent in the face of my passions, it soon regains its dominion over them in my memories. It is there that I judge myself with perhaps as much severity as I will be judged by the sovereign judge after this life. To judge men's speeches by the consequences they produce is usually a poor way to assess their worth. Apart from the fact that these consequences are not always perceptible or easy to recognize, they vary infinitely, as do the circumstances surrounding these speeches. Only the intention of the speaker gives them their worth and determines their degree of malice or goodness. To say what is false is to lie only when there is an intent to deceive, and even an intent to deceive, far from always being joined to an intent to harm, sometimes has an entirely different goal. Still, to make a lie innocent, it is not enough that there be no express intent to harm. There must, in addition, be certainty that the error into which those spoken to are thrown can harm neither them nor anyone in any way whatever. It is rare and difficult to come by such certainty. Thus it is difficult and rare for a lie to be perfectly innocent. To lie for our own advantage is deceit. To lie for the advantage of another is fraud. To lie in order to harm is slander, and is the worst kind of life. To lie without profit or prejudice to ourselves or another is not to lie. It is not a lie. It is a fiction. Fictions which have a moral purpose are called allegories or fables, and as their purpose is or must be only to wrap useful truths in easily perceived and pleasing forms, in such cases we hardly care about hiding the de facto lie, which is only the cloak of truth. And he who merely sets forth a fable as a fable in no way lies. There are other purely idle fictions, such as the greater part of stories and novels, which, containing no truthful instruction, have no purpose but amusement. Stripped of all moral usefulness, their worth can be assessed only in terms of the intention of the one who invents them. And when he forcefully sets them forth as real truths, we can scarcely deny that they are true lies. But who has ever had great scruples about those lies, and who has ever seriously reproached those who make them? If, for example, there is any moral purpose in the Temple de denied, it is thoroughly obfuscated and spoiled by voluptuous details and lascivious images. What has the author done to cover it with a gloss of modesty? He has pretended that his work was the translation of a Greek manuscript, and has fashioned the story about the discovery of this manuscript in the manner most likely to persuade his readers of the truth of his tale. If that is not a very positive lie, then let someone tell me what lying is. But who has thought to accuse the author of a crime for this lie, or to call him a deceiver for it? In vain will it be said that it is only a joke, that the author, though insisting on it, did not wish to persuade anyone, that in effect he persuaded no one, and that the public did not doubt for a moment that he was really the author of the supposedly Greek work of which he passed himself off as the translator. I will reply that if it had no purpose, such a joke was only a very silly and childish prank, that a liar lies no less when he insists, even though he does not persuade, that it is necessary to differentiate between the learned public and the hordes of simple credulous readers, whom the story of the manuscript, narrated by a serious author with the appearance of good faith, really deceived, and who fearlessly drank from a goblet of ancient form, the poison of which they would at least have been suspicious had it been presented to them in a modern vessel. Whether or not these distinctions are found in books, they occur no less in the heart of every man who keeps good faith with himself, and who does not want to permit himself anything for which his conscience might reproach him. For to say a false thing to one's own advantage is to lie no less than to say it to the prejudice of another, even though the lie might be less criminal. To give an advantage to one who ought not to have it is to disturb order and justice, to attribute falsely to ourselves or to another an act from which praise or blame, inculpation and exoneration might result, is to do an unjust thing. Now everything which, contrary to the truth, hurts justice in any way whatsoever is a lie. That is the exact limit. But everything which, though contrary to truth, in no way concerns justice, is only fiction, and I confess that anyone who blames himself for a pure fiction, as if it were a lie, has a more delicate conscience than I. What we call white lies are real lies, because to deceive to the advantage either of another or of ourselves is no less unjust than to deceive to our detriment. Whoever praises or criticizes contrary to the truth lies whenever a real person is involved. If it involves an imaginary being, he can say whatever he wants about it without lying, unless he judges the morality of the facts he invents and judges falsely. For if he does not then lie about the fact, he lies against moral truth, 100 times more respectable than that of facts. I have seen some of these people whom the world calls truthful. All their truthfulness is exhausted in idle conversations where they faithfully cite places, times, and persons, where they do not allow themselves any fiction, do not embroider any circumstances, and exaggerate nothing. In everything not touching their self-interest, they are of the most inviolable fidelity in their narrations. But if it involves speaking about some affair which concerns them, or of narrating some fact which touches them closely, all the colors are used so as to present things in the light most advantageous to them. And if a lie is useful to them, and they abstain from telling it themselves, they skillfully suggest it and arrange things so that it is adopted without it possibly being imputed to them. Thus wills, expediency, goodbye, truthfulness. The man I call truthful does just the opposite. In perfectly indifferent things, the truth the other man then respects so strongly concerns him very little, and he will scarcely have scruples about amusing a group of people with contrived facts from which no unjust judgment results either for or against anyone living or dead. But every speech which leads to profit or hurt, esteem or scorn, praise or blame for someone contrary to justice and truth, is a lie which will never approach his heart, his mouth, or his pen. He is solidly truthful, even against his self-interest, although he prides himself little enough on being so in idle conversations. He is truthful in that he seeks to deceive no one, is as faithful to the truth which indicts him as to the truth which honors him, and never deceives for his advantage or to harm his enemy. The difference, then, between my truthful man and the other man is that the world's is very rigorously faithful. Every truth which cost him nothing, but not beyond that, whereas mine never serves it so faithfully as when it is necessary to sacrifice himself for it. But it might be objected, how can this laxness accord with that ardent love for truth, for which I glorify him? Is that love false, then, since it admits so much alloy? No, it is pure and true, but it is only an emanation of the love of justice and never wants to be false, even though it is often fictitious. Justice and truth are two synonymous words in his mind, and he takes the one for the other indifferently. The holy truth his heart adores does not consist in indifferent deeds and useless names, but in faithfully rendering to each one what is owed in things which are truly his own, in imputing good or bad, in making retributions of honor or blame, praise and disapproval. He is not false with respect to someone else, either because his sense of equity keeps him from it, and because he does not want to harm anyone unjustly or in his own favor, because his conscience keeps him from it, and because he could not appropriate for himself what is not his own. Above all, he is jealous of his self-esteem. This is the good he can least get along without, and he would feel a real loss in acquiring the esteem of others at its expense. He will, therefore, sometimes lie about indifferent things without scruple and without believing he is lying, but never to hurt or profit another or himself. In all that pertains to historic truths, in all that relates to men's conduct, to justice, to sociability, and to useful insights, he will keep himself and others from error as much as it depends on him. Any lie other than that is not one according to him. If the temple denied is a useful work, the story about the Greek manuscript is only a very innocent fiction. It is a lie, very worthy of punishment, if the work is dangerous. Such were my rules of conscience about lying and truth. My heart followed these rules mechanically before my reason, and adopted them, and moral instinct alone applied them. The criminal lie of which poor Marion was the victim has left me with ineradicable remorse, which for the whole rest of my life has preserved me not only from every lie of this kind, but from all those which could in any way whatever affect another person's interest, and reputation. By thus generalizing the exclusion, I have exempted myself from weighing the advantage and prejudice exactly, and from marking the precise limits of the harmful lie and of the white lie. In considering the one and the other as blameworthy, I have forbidden myself both. In this, as in all the rest of my temperament, has greatly influenced my maxims, or rather my habits. For I have scarcely acted according to rules, or in anything scarcely followed any other rule than the impulses of my natural temperament. It never occurred to me to tell a premeditated lie. I have never lied for my self-interest, and I have frequently lied out of shame in order to extricate myself from an embarrassing situation with respect to things which were indifferent or which at the most concerned me alone, when, having to keep up a discussion, the slowness of my ideas and the aridity of my conversation forced me to resort to fictions so as to have something to say. When I absolutely have to speak, and amusing truths do not come to mind soon enough, I concoct fables so as not to remain mute. But in inventing these fables, I take as much care as I can that they not be lies. That is to say, that they hurt neither the justice nor the truth owed, and that they only be fictions indifferent to everyone and to me. It would certainly be my desire to substitute at least a moral truth for the truth of the facts, that is to say, to portray effectively the affections natural to the human heart, and always to set forth some useful instruction to make of them. In a word, moral tales or allegories, but more presence of mind than I have, and more facility of speech, would be needed to be able to make the babble of conversation benefit instruction. Its pace, more rapid than my ideas, and almost always forcing me to speak before thinking, has frequently suggested to me foolish and inappropriate things of which my reason disapproved, and which my heart disavowed as soon as they escaped from my mouth, but which, rushing ahead of my own judgment, could no longer be corrected by its censure. It is still by this first irresistible impulse of temperament that, in unforeseen and rapid moments, shame and timidity often wrest from me lies in which my will has no part at all, but which somehow rushed ahead of it because of the need to reply at the moment. Again, it is still by this first irresistible impulse of my temperament that, in unforeseen and rapid moments, shame and timidity often wrest from me lies in which my will has no part at all, but which somehow rush ahead of it, because of the need to reply at the moment. The deep impression of my memory of poor Marion can always fully restrain those which might be harmful to others, but not those which can serve to save me from some embarrassing situation when it is a question of myself, even though this is no less against my conscience and principles than those which might influence the lot of another. I swear to heaven that if in the following instant I could withdraw the lie which exculpates me, and tell the truth which burdens me without bringing a new insult on my head by my retraction, I would wholeheartedly do it. But the shame of thus catching myself at fault still holds me back, and I repent my fault very sincerely, without, however, daring to remedy it. An example will explain better what I wish to say, and will show that I lie neither due to interest nor self-love, even less due to envy or spite. but solely due to embarrassment and mortification, sometimes knowing very well that this lie is recognized as such and serves me in no way at all. Some time ago, M. Fauquier persuaded me against my normal practice to bring my wife along for a Dutch treat dinner with him and his friend Benoit at Madame Vacasson's, who was a restaurant keeper. She, along with her 2 daughters, also dined with us. In the middle of the dinner, the eldest, who had recently married and was pregnant, ventured to ask me brusquely, staring at me all the while, if I had any children. Blushing up to my eyes, I replied that I had not had this good fortune. She smiled mischievously, while looking at the rest of the group. All that was not very obscure, even for me. It is first of all clear that this reply is in no way the one I should have wished to make, even if I had intended to deceive, for given the disposition in which I saw her who addressed the question to me, I was very sure that my negative reply would change nothing in her opinion on this point. They expected this negative reply. They even provoked it so as to enjoy the pleasure of having made me lie. I was not dolt enough not to sense that. 2 minutes later, the reply I should have made came to me of itself. Now, that is hardly a discreet question for a young lady to ask a man who has passed his life as a bachelor. By speaking in this way, without lying and without having to blush from any admission, I would have placed the laughters on my side, and I would have given her a little lesson which naturally ought to have made her a little less impertinent in questioning me. I did nothing of the sort. I in no way said what should have been said. I said what should not have been said, and which could serve me in nothing. Thus it is certain that neither my judgment nor my will dictated my reply, but that it was the mechanical effect of my embarrassment. Previously, I did not have this embarrassment, and I would admit my faults with more frankness than shame, because I did not doubt that people saw what redeemed them and what I felt inside myself. But a mischievous eye distresses and disconcerts me in becoming more unfortunate. I have become more timid, and I have never lied except due to timidity. I never felt my natural aversion for lying better than when I was writing my confessions, for it is there that temptations would have been frequent and strong, however little my propensity might have carried me to that side. But far from having kept silent about anything or concealed anything which went against me, by a twist of mind which I have difficulty explaining to myself, and which perhaps comes from the estrangement from all intimation, I felt myself more readily inclined to lie in the contrary sense by accusing myself with too much severity than by excusing myself with too much indulgence. And my conscience assures me that one day I will be judged less severely than I have judged myself. Yes, with some proudness of soul I declare, and I feel, that in that writing I have carried good faith, veracity, and frankness as far, further even, at least I believe so, than any other man has ever done. Feeling that the good surpassed the evil, it was in my interest to say everything, and I said everything. I have never said less. I have sometimes said more, not with regard to facts, but with regard to circumstances, and this kind of lie was the effect of a delirious imagination rather than an act of will. I am even wrong to call it a lie, for none of these additions was one. I wrote my confessions when I was already old and disgusted with the vain pleasures of life, all of which I had sampled and whose emptiness my heart had thoroughly felt. I wrote them from memory. This memory often failed me, or only furnished me imperfect recollections, and I filled in the gaps with details which I dreamed up, details which supplanted these recollections, but which were never contrary to them. I like to dwell upon the happy moments of my life, and I sometimes embellish them with ornaments that tender regrets furnished me. I spoke of things I had forgotten as it seemed to me they must have been, as they had perhaps been in effect, never contrary to the way I recalled that they had been. I sometimes lent foreign charms to the truth, but I never replaced it with a lie so as to palliate my vices or ascribe virtues to myself. If without thinking about it, and by an involuntary movement, I sometimes hid my deformed side and depicted my good side, these reticences have been well compensated for by other more bizarre reticences, which often made me remain more assiduously silent about the good than about the evil. This is a peculiarity of my natural temperament, which it is quite excusable for men not to believe, but which, entirely unbelievable as it is no less real. I have often told the evil in all its baseness. I have rarely told the good in all its charm, and I have often been completely silent about it because it honored me too much, and because in making my confessions I would appear to have made my eulogy. I describe my youthful years without vaunting the happy qualities with which my heart was gifted, and even suppressing the deeds which placed them too much in evidence. Here I recall two from my early childhood, both of which indeed come to mind while I was writing, but both of which I rejected solely for the reason I have just mentioned. Almost every Sunday I used to go spend a day at Le Piquet, at the house of M. Fazzi, who had married one of my aunts, and who had a cotton print works there. One day I was in the drying house in the calendar room, and I was looking at the printing cylinders. Their gleam had caught my eye. Tempted to put my fingers on them, I was contentedly running them along the glossy side of the cylinder, when young Fazzi, having slid inside the wheel, gave it a half-quarter turn so skilfully that he got only the tips of my two longest fingers, but it was enough for them to be crushed at the tip and for both fingernails to remain there. I let out a piercing cry. Fazzi instantly turned the wheel back, but my fingernails remained none the less attached to the cylinder, and the blood streamed from my fingers. Fazzi, dismayed, cried out, jumped out of the wheel, embraced me, and implored me to hush my cries, adding that he was done for. At the height of my suffering, his own touched me. I calmed myself. We went to the carp pond, where he helped me wash my fingers and stop my bleeding with moss. Tearfully, he begged me not to tell on him. I promised him not to, and kept my promise so well that more than 20 years later, no one knew what accident had scarred two of my fingers, for they have always remained so. I was kept in bed for more than 3 weeks, and was unable to use my hand for more than 2 months, but insisted all the while that a large stone, in falling, had crushed my fingers. Magnanima menzogna, or quando il vero si bello che si posa et propriore? Question mark. This accident was even more painful for me due to the circumstances, for it was the period of the drills when the bourgeoisie was made to perform maneuvers, and we had formed a squad of 3 other children of my age, with whom I was supposed to perform the drill in uniform with the company from my neighborhood. I had the sorrow of hearing the company drummer, with my 3 comrades, passing under my window while I was in bed. My other story is very similar, but comes from a more advanced age. I was playing pall mall at Plain Palais with one of my comrades named Pliance. We quarreled about the game, fought with each other, and during the fight he hit my bare head with such a well-placed mallet blow that with a stronger hand he would have knocked my brains out. I fell instantly. I have never in my life seen an agitation similar to that of this poor boy upon seeing my blood streaming through my hair. He thought he had killed me. He threw himself on me, embraced me, and squeezed me tightly as he burst into tears and uttered piercing cries. I returned his embrace with all my strength, while crying like him in a confused emotion which was not without some tenderness. Finally he began to try to stop my continued bleeding, and seeing that our 2 handkerchiefs would not suffice, he led me to his mother, who had a little garden near there. This good lady almost fainted upon seeing me in this state, but she was able to remain strong enough to bandage me, and after having bathed my wound well, she applied iris petals soaked in brandy, an excellent vulnerary, much used in our region. Her tears and those of her son penetrated my heart to such an extent that for a long time I considered her as my mother and her son as my brother, until having lost sight of both, I forgot them little by little. I kept the same secret about this accident as about the other, and the 100 others of the same nature have happened to me in my life, which I was not even tempted to speak about in my confessions. So little was I seeking a way there to show off the good I felt to be part of my character. No, when I have spoken against the truth, which was known to me, it has only been with respect to indifferent things, and due more either to the embarrassment of speaking or to the pleasure of writing, than to any motive of self-interest or of advantage or prejudice for another. And anyone who reads my confessions impartially, if that ever happens, will sense that the admissions I make there are more humiliating and more painful to make than those about a greater evil, which would be less shameful to admit, and which I have not admitted because I have not done any. From all these reflections, it follows that the commitment I made to truthfulness is founded more on feelings of uprightness and equity than on the reality of things, and that in practice I have more readily followed the moral dictates of my conscience than abstract notions of the true and the false. I have frequently concocted fables, but very rarely lied. In following these principles, I have given others many openings to criticize me, but I have wronged no one at all, and I have never given myself any more of an advantage than was due me. Again, but I have wronged no one at all, and I have never given myself any more of an advantage that was due me. It is solely in that it seems to me that truth is a virtue. In every other respect, it is only a metaphysical entity for us from which neither good nor evil results. I do not, however, feel my heart to be sufficiently satisfied with these distinctions as to believe myself entirely irreprehensible. In weighing so carefully what I owed others, have I sufficiently examined what I owed myself? If it is necessary to be just to others, it is necessary to be true to oneself. That is an homage an honest man should render to his own dignity. When the sterility of my conversation forced me to make up for it with innocent fictions, I erred. Because to amuse someone else, we should in no way degrade ourselves, and when, carried away by the pleasure of writing, I added invented ornaments to real things, I erred even more, because to adorn truth with fables is, in effect, to disfigure it. But what makes me more inexcusable is the motto I had chosen. This motto obligated me more than any other man to a strict commitment to the truth, and it was not enough for me to sacrifice my interest and my inclinations to it in all things. I should also have sacrificed my weakness and my timid natural temperament to it. I should have had the courage and the strength to be truthful always, on every occasion, and never to let fictions or fables come out of a mouth and a pen which had been specifically dedicated to the truth. That, indeed, is what I should have said to myself upon adopting this proud motto, and should always have repeated to myself as long as I dared to keep it. Never has falseness dictated my lies to me. They have all come from weakness. But that excuses me very little. With a weak soul, we can at the most preserve ourselves from vice. But to dare to profess great virtues is to be arrogant and rash. Those, indeed, are the reflections which would probably never have come to my mind if Father Rousseau had not suggested them to me. It is undoubtedly very late to make use of them, but at least it is not too late to set my error straight and bring my will back in line, for henceforth that is all that depends on me. In this, then, and in all similar things, Solon's maxim is applicable to all ages, and it is never too late to learn, even from one's enemies, to be wise, true, modest, and to presume less of oneself.